a lot went on with Pesach intervening and all that, in
Yeah.
preparation. We were very much focusing on our thing, with Pesach in lots of ways. Although certainly the focus could have been different, could have been broader, but it actually brings in that focus. Even with you have the universal focus, you're still focusing on our stuff, and our history, our story. So you feel the tension there.
Yeah. Well, it's good to be with you this evening. I expect that we'll get a couple more folks trickling in. This is our third to last class. We're also going to meet next week, the 5th of May, and the following week, the 12th of May, and we'll close out. The last three sessions, sessions 12, 13, and 14, are a new theme, right? It's the third section of our course, and the way that Hartman sort of describes this section is this is the new relationship models for Jewish peoplehood. So this whole course has been about Jewish peoplehood, and especially about our relationship to Jewish peoplehood as it interacts with, like, North American Jewry interacting with Israeli Jewry. And we were really thinking about this aspect of how do we tell a story about our people that encompasses the totality of the people? And it isn't an easy question, because a lot of times there are things that make us want to tell a more narrow story, or a broader story. That is to say, sometimes we want to tell a story of American immigrants, and we don't want to tell the story of American Jewish immigrants. We want to tell a story of American immigrants, or we want to tell a story of humanity and what responsibilities humanity has to the planet. And we don't want to talk about Jewish humans as a separate category, right? So those are broader stories. Sometimes we want to tell narrower stories. The conservative Jewish movement, the Schenectady Jewish community, as opposed to thinking about our story of Jewish peoplehood as being, encompassing all Jews everywhere. Sometimes it's hard to see our common Jewish identity with people who perhaps don't even recognize some of us as being Jewish, or recognize our stream of Judaism as being legitimate. And so there are a lot of threats to Jewish peoplehood. And the closing section of our course is designed to invite us to expand our thinking about how to engage with the story of peoplehood. We're going to start by jumping in to the lecture with Daniel Hartman. And then we'll pause and discuss that lecture, and then we'll look at the conversation that he facilitates between Rabbis Lauren Birkin and Sarah Luria, which is an interesting conversation. So let's jump in. Let me share my screen. Share. Okay, here we are.
Over the last number of sessions, we have been analyzing 5 contemporary challenges to Jewish peoplehood: the discourse on nationalism, the debates around Zionism, the lack of consensus on anti-Semitism, the challenge of dual loyalty, and the shifts in the core objectives of Jews in North America. We will now shift from an analysis of central centrifugal forces and begin to explore different ways for conceiving and reconceptualizing our togetherness. What frameworks and models have been used in the past to define and govern the relationship between Israel and world Jewry? As we will show, it is precisely these models of togetherness and peoplehood which are today backfiring. Instead of bringing us together, they're pulling us apart. To reinvigorate Jewish peoplehood, what is required is that we reimagine the content of each model, and more importantly, the relationship they can have with each other. I will then explore these issues in greater depth in an interview with Rabbis Sarah Loria and Lauren Burke. Let's begin with briefly analyzing all the definitions. The following definitions are obviously not meant to exhaust each of the meanings of the categories, but to focus principally on those aspects which pertain to Jewish collective identity and which impact the relationship between Israel and world Jewry. When we speak about the Jewish people as family, we speak principally of an involuntary relationship which one inherits and does not choose, similar to the Judaism of being discussed earlier in this series. This is what we mean by family. In the context of a community, the family metaphor is generally, as I argued before, not intended as a literal racial category, but rather, if you will, as an imagined family, a community that chooses to view each other as historically connected, and that being part of a family generates a core, unconditional mutual obligation. Family means being there for each other. Family means having each other's back. Family is the principal and first source of identity. There is no option for exit. Estrangement, anger, disappointment, yes, but exit, no. Now, as distinct from family, all the other categories are essentially voluntary. You can and have to choose to join. And there exists an option for exiting and breaking the bond when the reasons for the choice have expired. Fellow believers are a group of people who join together by virtue of a shared belief or commitment to embody or promulgate a value, principle, or cause. To be part of the Jewish people is to be part of a group with a common mission, to be holy, to commit to tikkun olam, to serve as a light unto the nations, to be God's witness, to not give Hitler a posthumous victory, to name but a few. One joins because of one's identification with the mission. One can exit if one so chooses. The primary motivation for such an exit may be when one believes that the mission is no longer shared or no longer relevant or compelling. Partners are groups of individuals who join in a common undertaking with and for a particular purpose. It can be to further a certain belief, but it can also be for less idealistic reasons, such as one's safety or self-interest. What is important about this specific category in the context of the relationship between Israel and world Jewry is that partners share in both the risks and the profits. While exit is possible, one cannot exit at will. If there are losses or liabilities, one remains responsible. To be a partner is to be a partner together in good times and bad. One exit the partnership principally when the aim of the partnership is no longer shared, when it has been achieved, or when one of the partners is perceived to be acting in bad faith. Investors do not share in the mutual obligations of partners. They invest with the aim of gaining or facilitating a particular end or outcome. What is particular about this category, and the reason it is important in the context of Israel and world Jewry, is that it involves the expenditure of money, capital, or resources. And such expenditures are always complicated. An essential aspect of the investor relationship is that it embodies a core asymmetry between the one with the capital and the one being invested in, and the inherent power and need imbalance which it implies. The investor exits with relative ease once the outcome has been achieved, when there are unacceptable losses, or when the investor believes that achieving the particular outcome is no longer possible or shared by the investee. Consumers are not essentially a community with a shared purpose, but instead a group of individuals who expend capital for the sake of attaining personal benefits from the use of goods and services. Exit here is the simplest. It could be the result of disappointment with the product, but can and is often simply the result of competition, a new product which seems to be better or which is simply new. Let's now delve more deeply in the first and last categories, which on the surface are diametrically opposed, family and consumer, and their implications for the relationship between Israel and world Jewry. Since our inception as a people, Jews saw each other and the foundation of our collective identity in terms of family. It is the core feature of the covenant of being which we studied at the beginning of this series. When God said to Abraham, "Leave your land, your birthplace, your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation," that nation was defined as being constituted by the descendants of Abraham, his family. The original name of our people is the family name, the children of Israel. Even the current name Jew represents our family origins, being derived from the story of our shared descent from the tribe of Judah. To belong, one either had to be born or marry into the family. Now, since Jewishness is not a race, one can join through conversion. However, if one converts, one is viewed as joining the family and is considered to have become a descendant of Abraham. In the words of the rabbis, a convert is similar to a child who is born, reborn into the family with no exit option, similar to a Jew by birth. As discussed at length in the lecture on the covenant of being, a core expression of Jewish peoplehood as family is found in the principle of Jewish law, which determines that a Jew, even when they have sinned, is still and always a Jew. Just as problematic behavior, while possibly impacting on one's relationships with one's parents, does not alter one's status as their child, so too problematic behavior may be censured, but does not impact on one's core identity as a Jew. It is as a family that we ultimately emerged from 2,000 years of exile and returned to our home and rebuilt in Israel the national homeland of the family. Within this state, as expressed in Israel's law of return, all who have any family ties, who are seen by others as part of the family, are invited to come home and are granted automatic citizenship. For decades, North American Jewish support for Israel was also principally founded on this notion of family. Unlike Israeli Jews, to be a Zionist in North America did not mean a commitment to move to Israel, or even to see it as the center of Jewish life, but rather to support the family in Israel, to have their back. We are one in a way that only family members understood. We do not have to agree. We don't even have to like each other, but we are a family, and mutual loyalty is a given. One of the important transformations taking place principally in the North American Jewish community is that increasingly Jews are approaching their membership in the community and its institutions also from the perspective of a consumer. Jewishness is seen less and less as an inherited and involuntary identity, and more as a choice that one can make. In this context, individuals are asking, why should I belong? What am I getting out of it? As consumers, one only chooses to use a product, or in the case of Jewishness, to actively belong, to the extent that belonging is perceived to be important, beneficial, and adding a value. As a consumer, just as one chooses a Jewish identity, one can also choose a different institution, an identity to the extent that they better meet one's needs. In North America, for example, being American or Canadian can constitute a viable alternative identity to one's Jewishness. North American Jewish institutions such as federations, synagogues, and Jewish community centers, which for decades counted on guaranteed membership as a result of the fact that they served essentially as community settings for the family, are now facing dramatically decreased affiliations. If in the past the Jew belonged, joined, and contributed to the family's institutions simply because they were Jews, together that is no longer a given. Institutions which did not have to compete for loyalty find themselves challenged to make a case for why someone should join or belong. The shift to the consumer framework has been a mixed blessing. On the one hand, it represents a loss of thickness that family connections imply, and a challenge, as Jewishness and its collective consciousness are no longer a given and a necessary aspect of one's identity. However, at the same time, while family creates intense relationships and commitments, it can also create relationships where you take people for granted. You don't pick your family. Family assumes a deep bond which you do not necessarily have to nurture, and as a result can in many cases become atrophied due to neglect. Consumers, on the other hand, demands attention, as you are forced to constantly work to maintain the interest and commitment of your consumers while ever mindful of the competition. You must know your consumer and respond to their needs and interests, for otherwise they'll simply leave. Consumerism is challenging the Jewish family to answer, what and why are you doing that? How do you speak to my needs? How do you speak to me in a way that sees me, hears me, makes room for me? While it can be challenging, it has also forced a reevaluation and renaissance of Jewish communal institutions, as they can no longer simply assume loyalty and belonging, and instead need to work to innovate, to meet and respond to the needs and expectations of their members. Now, Israelis, just like their North American counterparts, are increasingly adopting a consumerist outlook in many areas of their lives. Startup Nation has taught Israelis to work for, expect, and demand quality and excellence. When it comes to their Jewishness, however, they are still predominantly motivated by the family model. Even while more and more Israelis do Jewish in different ways, they do so principally because it is the tradition of the family. That is why they're still willing to use services that they find less compelling, such as the official rabbinate, and prefer to not go to a synagogue rather than to fight to create a synagogue which would meet their needs as consumers. In many ways, one of the great challenges of Jewish education in Israel is how to move Israelis to adopt a startup consciousness in their Jewish lives as well. When they do, new avenues will be open for relationship and partnership with world Jewry. We will discuss this further in the next session. Now, what happens when one community sees Jewishness predominantly in terms of the family model, while the other increasingly adopts a consumer's perspective? While North American Jews are adding greater weight to their consumerist sensibilities, Israelis still predominantly think in terms of the family model. Whether in the law of return or as you studied in the new nation-state law, they assume a deep sense of loyalty and responsibility for all Jews worldwide who find themselves in danger, principally physical dangers, but also spiritual dangers as well. As family, Israelis expect the same loyalty in return from North American Jews. Like many families, we don't need to see each other often, understand each other, or even like each other. But in times of need, you're expected to be on my side. It doesn't matter whether you agree with the occupation or Israel's policies regarding state and religion. It doesn't matter whether you feel affronted or insulted. You don't need to like me. We are family, and as such, we expect you to limit your criticism and to simply stand with us when we ask and whenever we need. At the same time that Israelis are looking for and expecting family loyalty, consumerist North American Jews are asking of Israel the same questions that they are directing to their own institutions, questions of value, meaning, and importance. An Israel which does not know or respond to North American Jewry's needs, sensitivities, or sensibilities will not be able to sustain a relationship with individuals who have a choice whether to enter into a relationship and who increasingly have an alternate, comfortable communal identity in North America. In this context, Israel's policies will not be overlooked and instead will shape the case, either for or against a relationship. The family model, however, is challenged not merely by increased consumerism within North American Jewry, but principally by an inherent weakness within the family model for contemporary Jewish life. The family model assumes that we're brothers and sisters, and that this tie is the one which is most meaningful and significant. This, however, is true only when siblings are young. As we grow older and enter additional committed relationships, we forge new family ties with our spouses or significant others, which also claim our loyalty. And in most cases, at least where the relationship is healthy, in fact, take precedence. Until the latter part of the 20th century, Jewishness was the singular and principal identity through which a Jew saw themselves and viewed the world. The constant onslaught of anti-Semitism ensured and ensconced this singularity, as we were excluded from belonging to other groups and communities. Being othered by the world preserved our Jewish identity in a form of adolescence, where our principal ties were with each other. There was no one else with whom we could enter into a deep relationship. As a result, loyalty to our people or family was strong and always took precedence. Post-Holocaust Jewish life in Israel and North America has brought about a change in the singularity and exclusiveness of our Jewish identity, which instead simultaneously encompasses multiple and complex identities. In Israel, for example, we are no longer exclusively Jews, but also Israelis. Similarly, in North America, we are American and Canadian alongside our Jewishness. In essence, we are like siblings who as adults have embraced new relationships and commitments. Israelis may see Jewry as family, which can and does make demands upon Israel. But as Israelis, we have to give primacy to the needs, demands, and interests of our new spouse, Israel. Israel's political and security interests, not to speak of coalition demands, must naturally take precedence. Similarly, American and Canadian Jews have found and built a home in North America. They're not a diaspora and are deeply grateful for the love and acceptance they experience with their new family and recognize the claims it makes upon them. This new mature reality of family with new and multiple commitments is a blessing which 2,000 years of Jewish life aspired toward. At the same time, however, this new reality is the source of significant tension between Israel and North American Jews. When Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu attacked President Obama and his proposed deal with Iran on the floor of the US Congress in Washington, he felt that he was representing the interests of Israel and turned to his family in North America, the Jews, demanding their support against a policy that he believed to be existentially dangerous to Israel. He turned to North American Jewry as brothers and sisters and demanded the loyalty that family members have a right to expect. What he forgot was that American Jews are not merely siblings who happen to not be living at home, Israel, but siblings who are Americans and who are engaged in a deep and intense relationship with being American. President Obama was not merely the president of the United States, but their president. And an affront to their president was comparable to entering one's sibling's home and attacking their spouse and family. Conversely, North American Jewish leadership experienced Israel's reneging on the Kotel deal as a failure of loyalty. As part of the family, liberal Jews rightfully expected a space in the family home, a public recognition of their legitimacy, not a legitimacy of their Judaism, but a legitimacy of their status as members of the family. They could not understand the government's reversal of support, nor the apathy of the majority of Israeli Jews to their requests. Similar to Prime Minister Netanyahu, they forgot that Israeli Jews, while embracing all Jews as members of the family, have a deeper commitment and give prioritization to Israeli Jews' needs and interests. Most Israeli Jews don't perceive egalitarian prayer at the Kotel as a spiritual need. Remember, they're not consumerists when it comes to Judaism. And so they chose to give greater weight to sustaining their coalition government over those of liberal American Jews. They chose to prioritize what they believe were the interests of Israeli Jews over those of North America. The Israeli mantra, "Come to Israel and vote, and then we will take your needs into account," is not meant as a superficial dismissal, but rather as an invitation to embrace a hyphenated Israeli identity as distinct from a hyphenated North American Jewish identity. Join my new subfamily, and only then will you claim my principal loyalty. To conclude, the family model, which was one of, if not the, central carrier of Jewish collective life for more than 3,000 years, presently faces significant challenges. The first is that it is subject to competition from the consumerist model that is playing an ever-increasingly significant role in Jewish life in North America. While Jewish consumers do not necessarily reject and exclude themselves from the family model, they do not experience the family model as sufficient and demand that Judaism, like the Jewish people, and Israel represent a product which provides meaning and value to their lives. They are no longer satisfied with being Jewish and being committed to Jewish peoplehood and Israel simply because of a sense of shared past and origins which one inherited and which demands loyalty and reprioritization. Regardless of how one feels about this consumerist move in Jewish life, whether one sees it as a challenge or a blessing, personally, I believe it is both, it is here to stay. While family consciousness may be strengthened through various educational and experiential interventions, we can no longer simply assume the loyalty of Jews to Israel as a given. We have to earn it, and earning it will require not merely a discourse of responsibilities, but of policies as well. Furthermore, even if somehow the family model miraculously underwent a revival among the next generation of North American Jews, it's important that we recognize that it can no longer have the same significance for 21st century Jewish life. As discussed at the outset of this series, we are a people with two homes, and these two homes also contain two distinct families. We have matured as a people and built sub-family units within the larger family structure, which claim our loyalty in ways that mitigate the singular Jewish family bond. We are Israeli, American, Canadian Jews. We are hyphenated Jews with Israel, the United States, and Canada making demands and expecting prioritization. The mythic, idealized Jewish family model of Hine matovu manaim shevet achim gam yachad, how good and pleasant is it when brothers and sisters sit together, cannot be recreated for a contemporary hyphenated, multi-encumbered contemporary Jewish life. Paradoxically, for the family to reinstitute itself in the life of adult siblings, it has to adopt a consumerist consciousness. To overcome the particular loyalties of our subfamilies, like United States, Canada, or Israel, the family cannot merely refer to a shared past, but needs to develop a shared meaning and value in the present and in the future. In this way, consumerism, instead of being a threat to the family model, is actually the secret to its salvation. Finally, whether family and consumer compete or complete each other, the mere recognition of the existence of the two models is critical in reestablishing a healthier relationship between Israel and world Jewry. Assuming that the other is functioning within one's own predominant model, and without understanding that the other may be functioning within a completely different set of considerations, is a prescription for mutual alienation. As in all relationships, we don't always have to agree with each other. But if we understand the other, we have the possibility of avoiding conflict, developing greater mutual respect, and beginning to lay solid foundations for a new shared future. Thank you.
All right, thoughts, reactions? You gotta unmute.
You set a high bar. And I just want to mention it's relevant to this lecture is 2 weeks ago, the international edition in the English of the Jerusalem Post had a whole page article of the diaspora minister actually, how shall I say, raising this issue and directing it to Israelis, saying that they must improve their relation. But first, they must get to know diaspora Jews and especially Americans, and then work to develop a closer and a trustful relationship.
Right. So I think what Hartman is saying is there are positives and negatives to both the family model and the consumerist model. And we have to face the reality that we're living in a world with an increasingly consumerist model, but we can actually see that as a salvation. The consumerist model responds to the problems in the family model. So if we can take the good parts of the consumerist model and apply them to the family model, we can actually have something that's stronger together in exactly the way that you're saying, Marie. That is to say, this appealing to the Israeli Jewish community to say, yes, we get that you're Israeli Jews, but you have to consider making your Israeli Judaism an Israeliness which is consumable, palatable to the American Jewish consumer. You have to make choices, policy choices, that make Israel more consumable to the brothers and sisters who are now feeling alienated and like they don't have a seat at the family table. And doing that acknowledges both the familial world Jewry relationship, but it leverages the consumerist model to the language of it to be able to enable Israeli Jews to make different kinds of decisions, policy decisions, that might help to keep these communities more together. On the same side, like we as American Jews also have to think about, right? When we talk to Israeli Jews, we have to emphasize these family relationships, even though our primary relationship to our own Judaism is more connected to a consumerist model. So so I do think that there's like a real powerful melding that he's talking about, where each model can actually serve to meet the gaps that are created by the other model itself. Edith, I think I saw your hand.
Well, yeah. Unfortunately, I keep thinking back, and I don't know how many years ago it was. It was during the high holiday season when one or several of the rabbis in Israel said that any Jew who went to that observed the holidays sitting in a place where men and women sat together were no longer Jews. And it has bothered me ever since and has really colored my view of being an American Jew and being an Israeli Jew, and was probably, at that point, realized that there was no way I could follow the Judaism that I have been following all my life and live in Israel. Visit for a short time, yeah, but never could live. And really felt written out of the family. But they have no place for me.
Right. I mean, yeah. And that experience is so powerfully mirrored by many American Jews. I would just say that there are plenty of American Jews who feel the same way about your Jewish practice, who don't live in Israel. And there are many Israeli Jews who do not feel that way at all about your practice. So what you're talking about is a divide between sort of the ultra-Orthodox and the rest of Judaism. And while I completely agree with you that that is a huge divider for me as well, like, it is not a done deal that ultra-Orthodox interests color what it means to be Jewish in the state of Israel. It is true that that has been the case for a couple of decades, but at this moment right now, coalition that exists right now, that is not the case. And the ultra-Orthodox community has a much lower say in the government and the democracy of what it means to define Judaism in Israel. And that's manifesting itself in many different ways, including officiation at weddings by non-Orthodox rabbis, including acceptance of some non-Orthodox conversions as acceptable, including including the inclusion of non-Orthodox ways of praying in as accepted in the Israeli army. And it's not perfect, right? The state of Israel still pays the salaries of Orthodox rabbis and doesn't pay the salaries of conservative or reform rabbis. The community still, the government still can't get itself together to finish the Kotel project that it keeps promising that it will. And so I'm not trying to paint a completely rosy picture, but I will say that in a democracy, the words of a couple of ultra-Orthodox rabbis is not necessarily the end of the story, which isn't to say that you won't still be disappointed every time you turn around. Yeah, I mean, disappointment's sort of part of that. Like, you're always going to have a sibling or an uncle who
Yeah,
doesn't
there are
exactly,
conservative-
yeah.
There are conservative synagogues in Israel, the same as we have. So it's Edith, you should not feel that's just directed to us American Jews. It's to all Jews on the globe that may practice the conservative
Yeah.
Or reform.
Yeah. The Masorti conservative movement in Ukraine is one of the, I think, the biggest population of like Jewishly practicing Ukrainian Jews are like members of conservative Masorti congregations. There's a small Orthodox community in Ukraine, and there was a very robust and flourishing Masorti conservative community in Ukraine. And I actually have friends who are rabbis in Israel who speak Russian because they come from a Russian background, who have been flying in and out of Poland for the last month, providing services to our Masorti congregations in Ukraine and anybody else who wants the services. Anita.
Yeah, I was coming from another point of view, sort of a microcosm, actually. Having worked on the long-term planning committee for the future of Agudath Achim, I see that even in American Judaism, we had always relied on the family model to fill our synagogues, and now as we have produced this plan, we're moving with both feet into the consumer model, because we need to give all our current membership and any new membership what they need to stay with us, to be with us, to stay with us, to grow our congregation. So we're being faced with that here in American Judaism too, in North American Judaism, to hold North American Jews together because they have so many choices.
No question. Why would I write a check to Federation? Why would I write a check to Federation, right?
Instead of the United Way, or
my grandparents wrote checks to Federation because they were Jewish, and everybody that they knew wrote checks to Federation, right? And there are still people in my generation who do that, but they are few and far between. You want to know why to write a check to Federation? You want to actually have a sense for what Federation does for you. Now, I don't think that's necessarily bad, because it requires Federation to be more creative, more nimble. It requires Federation to respond to the needs of the community more quickly. And it requires Federation to be much more transparent with where all this money is going, which I think is on balance. I think that's good. I think for decades,
but Federation has always done that. Because I worked for Federation for quite a few years, so I know the script for Super Sunday, for any kind of solicitation. We always emphasized how much money remained in the community, but people don't have the connections to those institutions that the money is going to. The Hebrew Academy is a fraction of the size it was 25 years ago. We know that the Daughters of Sarah gets huge amounts of money from New York State for Medicare, and so any money that's coming from Federation, the only thing that that I have emphasized, having sat on the scholarship committee, where $60,000 a year is being committed to summer summer programs, and many thousands of dollars to Israel programs or college programs for Judaic type studies. That's one of the stronger these days connections, maybe. We always emphasize JDC, the monies that went to poor Jews in Europe, Hayas. And we would take trips to New York to visit those institutions, but they've lost their relevancy to many people. The JCC may be one of the things that holds people still.
Yeah, but why not just write a check to the JCC?
Yeah, that's it, and have your membership at the JCC. Even we are all supporting it, even if we're not members, because there are certain funds that go to the JCC, and it's the variety of their programs.
Yeah,
Jewish Family Services.
Right. Again, like, I support JFS, right? I don't feel like it's necessary for me to funnel my money to JFS through Federation. That seems like an extra step. But I also write a check to Federation, in part because I think that's an important thing to do as a member of the Jewish community, and I still buy into that older model. But I really do like the way in which a consumerist model forces us to be more creative, right? Our own strategic plan, right? If we want Judaism to be meaningful to the next generation, we have to engage with a Judaism that is meaningful to us. And that means that we can't sit through Shabbat morning services that we don't find meaningful without asking the question, how can we make this experience more meaningful to us? I think that's really important. And it's also true of our relationship with Israel. Now, I think we need to go as a community to Israel. I think we need to engage with Israel, I think we need to have the difficult conversations about Israel. I think the answer isn't Israel isn't meaningful, so let's stop talking about it. I think the answer is, how is Israel meaningful? Let's figure it out. Which is also how I feel about Shabbat, and also how I feel about Shabbat morning services.
Well,
Yeah, Bob.
I was just trying to figure out how to put this together, but before I ever went to Israel or got involved with much Jewish observance, I felt very strongly a part of the tribe. That I had that family feeling. That was what. How did I feel that? Whatever connections I had to Jewish people, my family, etc. Later on in life, I got more involved in some of the ritual things and other things in the history and all that. I've been to Israel only twice in my life, and I have to say, I don't feel welcome there. I've never felt welcome there. It didn't feel welcoming. It didn't feel like this is family. Now, what's that's worth? That's maybe I just wasn't in the right place at the right time. But that's a feeling, and seeing some of the things they're doing politically and economically, it's not necessarily something that calls to me. I feel very, very, very angry about, the seeing what happens at the wall with the women of the wall, and and seeing how Judaism is manifested in that way, in that perverted way that I see going on, and that repulses me. I don't feel part of that. I feel, that there's injustice being done there in the name of religion, and so it's a struggle. it's a bit of a struggle.
No question. No question. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would hope that yeah, I mean, I'm curious to know more about your feeling of not being welcomed. Like, do you think it's like not understanding the language is the principal aspect of that, or do you think it's has to do with the religious values? Or
I think it's a gut reaction. It's a holistic reaction, really. I've spoken to people of my contemporaries or younger or older who said, as soon as I stepped foot off the plane in Israel, I was at home, and whatever. And I never have felt that. I certainly have found elements that I enjoyed and connected to, and so on and so forth, but didn't feel like a welcoming place for me. Now, maybe that's just because I'm very much involved in being an American, and not. But I still feel a member of that tribe, that group, but it doesn't seem to manifest so much there in terms of feeling like a welcome place. Yeah, certainly if I was more fluent in Hebrew and all that, it would make some difference. But that doesn't what makes it or breaks it for me. So,
yeah, Marcia.
Murray has lots of relatives in Israel, and we've gone pretty often over the years, and they always are very welcoming, and we have a good time with them. And I have to say, they are very non-religious, but they haven't got the slightest bit of curiosity about any of our practices here. They've been to a couple of bar mitzvahs here, but they couldn't care less about what we do. They're just not interested in it at all. So they welcome us very nicely, but don't care about what we do here.
Well, that's exactly what the diaspora minister was addressing.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? If you Israeli Jews want to rely on the language of family to include American Jews in your interests, in your lives, if you want to say you're our brothers and sisters, so vote like, in Israel's interests, right? Then you also have to show interest in your American families' practices and values and ideas, and like you can't have a relationship with a sibling who never asks you any questions about your own life. Like, you're gonna call them every week and say, how are you? And oh, you're doing this and you're doing that, and just one-sided conversation. Like, after a while, you're like, yeah, another one-sided conversation, which is, I think, how a lot of American Jews feel about how it's been going with Israel. It's like, yeah, it's one-sided conversations the whole way. Yeah, Marcia.
The same relatives don't pay any, I don't think, I haven't seen them talk at all about how the extreme Orthodox are sort of harming things for Israel overseas. They don't seem to pay much attention to that either. And I think they'd better wake up before it's kind of too late.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is like what Danielle Hartman said, is that Israeli Jews are very concerned about their fragile coalition government. And if the coalition government was going to fall apart over the Kotel deal, it just isn't worth it. And I completely get that. Like, they are responding to a different calculus of what is important and what isn't. But I completely agree with you that if we are trying to be one Jewish community, and I will say this, right? I am teaching a Hartman program in English to American Jews, okay? But the Hartman Institute also does programs like this in Hebrew for Israeli Jews. Like Danielle Hartman, this was filmed at Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, where they are doing programs all the time for Israelis who are in Jerusalem about Jewish pluralism and the importance of thinking about world Jewry and like all of this sort of stuff. So Hartman really sees itself as an institution as doing this project. I'm very excited about spending a couple weeks there this summer in July and seeing firsthand how that's happening. Mishka.
Excuse me, kind of obviously picking up on what Bob was saying, the times that he's been to Israel, have been to see family. I have lots of cousins there, and the welcoming came from them, but even the curiosity that you might think that they would feel about America, having been here a couple of times, really wasn't exhibited. It was more, come look and see what we do. Come look and see what we do. And I've frequently said, well, why don't you just come and visit us? Well, no. And they went to Hong Kong instead the last time. So there isn't that reciprocation. And I think I mentioned somewhere along the line before that, we send kids, or we have sent kids on birthright. So you've got college age kids. And I just heard about somebody who's 14-year-old is in Israel right now. We'll have a few kids maybe come as shlichim for summer camp at the JCC, but we don't get troves of kids coming here. We don't have students coming here except directly to go to college or to go to some school, not to learn about American life, and certainly not learning about Jewish American life, which is really very frustrating.
I think you're underestimating the effect of the, I don't know, 5,000 or 6,000 shlichim that come every summer to summer camp.
But they come to summer camps, which is not representative of America at all.
No, it's way better.
It's way better, but it's not the same thing. It's not going out and seeing how people live. It's not going to the neighborhood synagogue and seeing how do people live as a Jewish community there.
I don't disagree with you at all. I think that that's true.
Right. But the other piece of
There's no money in bringing Israelis here, but there should be.
There should be. But the other piece that I found very, very frustrating, very painful, one of my oldest, dearest friend, her family has become virtually Haredi.
Yes.
And we spent time with them the last trip to Israel, which was in 2019. And it was almost as if they were trying to push away their American identity. We are now Israeli. We are from whatever happens there, except for the fact that they have a son who's in Brooklyn. It doesn't matter to them anymore. And with the exception of some political, I mean, they still have American citizenship, they're still collecting Social Security, and their kids are not going into the army because they're not becoming Israeli citizens. There's this real net, Bob, I don't know if you felt that, but I just felt this really negative feeling. We don't want really to have much to do with you anymore.
Oh, we talked about that. Yes, get that sense from
I
one
mean,
branch of it.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess, you know, like that might bother you as a friend.
Friends.
Yes,
Right.
clearly, that's a personal thing,
Sure.
but it kind of goes very much back to what Edith was talking about, where one of the daughters refused to see me at one of my prior trips. Think they were living in Mea Shearim then, and of course, I didn't know how to behave in Mea Shearim. I wouldn't know how to dress to be in such a place, and she refused to see me.
Right, which I think that's very challenging when you lose a friend.
It was very painful.
Very, very painful. No
I
question.
diapered this kid. She wouldn't
But
see me.
completely, I think largely sort of more connected to a transition to Frumkeit than to a than to the particular Israel location. Like so
That's definitely a big piece of it. Yes.
Yeah. Let's jump into the next section, which is an interview with the rabbis. Let's check that out, and we'll come back together and discuss.
In the last lecture, we studied the ideas of family and consumer, two categories that define Jewish identity, collective and individual. Family was the model that shaped Jewish people's understanding of who we are as a community. We're a family. And that defined Jewishness for close to 3,500 years. Over the last number of decades, a new idea is emerging, which is shaping Jewish collective life, in which Jews see themselves increasingly as consumers. Today, we're joined by two rabbis, Rabbi Sarah Loria and Rabbi Lauren Birkin. Two rabbis who both work within the community, within congregational settings, but not exactly within classical congregational settings. And I want to talk to you about that. Lauren, what is the nature of the congregations that you serve? And how do you experience the impact of consumerism on North American Jewish life?
Well, as director of rabbinic programs at Hartman, I have the privilege of working with hundreds of rabbis, most of whom are working in synagogue settings. And I'm also the spouse of a congregational rabbi in Miami. And so I'm deeply immersed in what I see as a deep anxiety that many rabbis face about membership and the declining dues-paying membership of so many synagogues in North America. And I think that rabbis are really facing a catch-22, because living in a consumerist culture where people are addicted to instant gratification, to tangible benefits, to peak moments, rabbis feel an inordinate amount of pressure to perform in those peak moments, to give the most outstanding high holiday sermon, to give the most innovative and transformative bar mitzvah service.
Because if they won't, people will leave?
Because it's the one time in the year they have to deliver to a dues-paying member the product that member is paying for in kind of that transactional relationship, the one time they have to touch people's souls, but also the one time they have to retain members in a competing marketplace where there are other options. And the challenge is that on a deep level, rabbis know that what humans are yearning for and longing for is a sense of belonging and community. And
the consumer doesn't know that?
Well, the consumer that wants those peak moments and maybe will only come in an episodic way one time a year, want to walk in that one time a year and feel at home and feel welcomed and feel fully themselves and be able to be open and vulnerable. But we know from a family model that that's not the way relationships are formed. We know if you think about families that live far apart from each other, that maybe see each other once a year on Thanksgiving or for a Passover Seder, and the immense pressure families feel that that one meal should be the most perfect family experience of full joy and deep bonding to last until the next year when the full extended family comes back together. And I think it's why so often holidays can be deeply disappointing and depressing because
So are these moments deeply depressing for the rabbi?
I think I think for rabbis, the moments feel insufficient. They're necessary, but not sufficient. We need those peak moments, but when you think about what creates a thick fabric of a family, it's the ongoing, sustained, often boring and mundane daily interactions. And
So the consumer wants family, but sets up a model which gives them something that they think they want, but then in fact they don't really, it's not going to give them what they really are looking for.
I
So
think
that's a sad story.
it's a challenge.
Sarah, what's your experience?
I love the idea of Judaism being a family. I run a synagogue, version of a synagogue, an adjacent synagogue out of my house. I run a community out of my house called Beloved. And my family.
Out of your house?
At our house. So my family is there. We have 4 floors in the house. And when we're having prayer on the first floor, my children are yelling because they don't want to go to bed on the second floor. So if anyone is invested in sharing the model of a Jewish family with her community, I would say I am in it. And I think in this moment in American life, consumerism has gotten into our bones in a way that is heartbreaking. And so I had never thought about consumerism the way you talked about it, which is that it really allows for us to create a marketplace in Jewish life that is vibrant and wonderful, which I am excited about. But what I often see in the consumerism part of America is that people are not there's an understanding that everyone is a product. Every human being is a product. Or that we're makers of products. And that's all we do, is that we go to work and then we make perfect children and then we make dinner and then our lives are picturesque. And I think the consumerism model has been really detrimental to the spirit of American Jews, the spirits of Americans in general, because as we know, as countercultural Jews, the neshama is not a product. We are not here, we are not put on this earth to make it, to go to work. We are put on this earth to love and to breathe and to be human. And so I think consumerism has taken that away from us in some ways.
But you yourself still play a little bit within the consumerist model, don't you? You're appealing to Jews who, as consumers, aren't finding their place within a larger congregation.
I don't think about it that way. I hear what you're saying, and the way I think about it is that the institutions of the 20th century were set up with the understanding of the family loyalty model, right? They were set up to understand that Jews support Jews. And so we're gonna build day schools and federations and synagogues, and Jews will come and they will join because the family model was strong. And there was a sense of loyalty and Jews first. I think that since we understand that that model doesn't work as well anymore, what I am trying to do is what I call re-familying. So I'm trying to make family a verb, not a noun. So if family is just like, these are the people you're stuck with and you've got to love them no matter what.
So family's not something you have to inherit.
Exactly. Family is something you actually have to do.
Invest in.
You have to choose to be obligated, which is the difference, I think, with the consumer model. You have to choose to be obligated to this set of people, but I don't think they're coming in and consuming Judaism at Beloved.
Right. Now, in the context of a congregation, of a larger congregation, Is the family model dead? Is it possible to recreate it?
Well, I would agree with Sarah that we can't separate being part of a family from the doing, the actions. This is your Judaism of being and Judaism of becoming, I think, has a symbiotic relationship. And we know this even just from human relationships and from a healthy family, that feeling that you are part of a family comes from all of the activities you do with your family, whether it's family dinners, whether it's carpool and talking in the car. It's the regular, ongoing, sustained activities that create the fabric of a thick family identity. And actually, in your father's seminal work, A Living Covenant, David Hartman writes about the kinds of laws in the Torah, the mishpatim, which are the moral, ethical laws that are shared universally with all humanity. Do not kill, do not steal. But he talks about the chukim, those ritual practices of the Jewish tradition, whether it's the holidays or other ritual practices that are, in a sense, the family customs. Those particular practices are what create that sense of family ties and family memories. And so I think there needs to be a balance in a relationship between feeling part of a family because that's just who you are, and all the things that you do in an ongoing, sustained way.
So coming to shul is almost, coming to synagogue is almost, it's not coming to the family that you're coerced to belong to, but it's actually coming to your family story.
Right, and the challenge is if you only come once or twice a year,
It's kind of
how will
tough.
you create that? That's the great challenge.
So the problem of congregational life is not the family model. And both of you are speaking about how people really want the family model. That there's, you want to turn into a verb. And you were speaking beforehand about how people, they really want to feel connected. The problem then is that we want family, but we're not investing enough to actually create a sustained one. It's, as you said before, and I'm going to see you once a year. What type of family do we have? So the synagogue, it's not that the family model is dying, but that the frequency, the bandwidth, undermines it because you don't feel it, and then you become a consumer.
Danielle, you spoke in your lecture about how consumerism can actually help lead to excellence because it inspires rabbis and Jewish communities to create experiences of real meaning and quality. And it makes me think about the way in which peak experiential moments can then become the seed for ongoing family. And I think we see this a lot in synagogue communities. Ironically, I think we see this in Israel missions for so many American synagogues, taking a group, a small group from a large synagogue, and bringing them on a 2-week journey to Israel, ends up producing years and years of committed members who feel deeply bonded with one another as a mini community, a chavurah within the larger synagogue. They become the future lay leadership of the synagogue. And out of that peak moment where many families are, in a sense, purchasing an intensive Jewish identity investment for their family, and it's an expensive investment. But
it's like a family vacation.
But it's more,
like
but it's a pilgrimage.
I take my whole family on vacation so that they'll have
Families invest in that as well, because they know that, you know, it's those memories, this building of those intense experiences that will then kind of fuel that family bond.
I want to come back to the Israel model in a moment, because something really interesting is happening where you come to Israel not to be at family with Israelis, but to be at families with yourself. Right. And I want to come back to that in a moment. But how do you feel this idea of creating family as a verb through peak experiences? How do you relate to that?
I would say what we're doing is the exact opposite. We're doing the weaving of relationships. It's not about something out there. It's about something in this room. That's why we do our work in our living room, because you can only have 40 or 50 people in our living room, and we have to look at each other, and it's very down on earth, not at the peak at all. I think that what our people experience in the capitalist consumer culture that we have is that they themselves as human beings don't matter. It's what they can think about and create and produce that really matters. And then they go out in culture and that's what they experience. And then they come to Beloved, we hope, and they experience that they themselves matter, that their spirit, it matters that they're there. And not just that any 50 people are there, but that each one of those people, it matters that they're there. And if that's a peak experience, then great. That's their peak experience. That I look at them when they come in, I'm so glad you're here. There's wine in the kitchen. And then we sit together in the living room and we have an experience of being with each other, sharing in small groups.
But the size of your community
Yeah.
gives you opportunities in
Yeah.
many ways. What you're talking about is creating peak experiences for smaller numbers of communities within a congregation that has thousands of people. So is the future of North American Jewish life to move to smaller ones, or do we stay, or is it the larger ones breaking down, moving back and forth? Because what Lauren was speaking about is, I'm serving, I don't know how many thousand families in this congregation, tens, I don't know how many people. So I have to create these mini communities. Is that where we're going to go, or are we going to, or are the larger communities going to survive, but with these peak experiences?
I'm invested in small scale.
You're in small scale.
I'm invested in small scale. I think if we want to communicate family, it's very hard to do it on a large scale.
It just
You
is.
don't start by introducing your baby to your extended family and having any one of them take care of the baby. You have your immediate family. And so if we're going to show people that you're part of a bigger story, they have to feel it in their bodies. And so when they're at Beloved, they feel in their bodies, you are part of this story here of the 50 of us. And we have what I called an ancestor wall, which is that we have pictures of Beloved's people who have died, people who they've loved who have died on the wall with a mirror. And so they know that their people are in this room with them and that they are also present in this room through the mirror. And I want them to know you are here, your story is part of this place. And I cannot do that on a large scale. And I do actually think that large congregations, Angela Buchdahl said when she took the reins of Central Synagogue, she said, I want to make this place bigger, meaning I want to live stream our services, which she does, and I want to make it smaller, meaning you can't feel this sense of intimacy in a huge place. You have to have that small family model.
I hear you. It's really interesting how these two models of family and consumer are alive in both of your institutions in very, very different ways, and how you dance or speak to people who come with those two models, and how also, in many ways, you're both trying to revitalize a family model, one within a smaller structure, and one by creating peak moments within a community. I want to shift now for a moment on the way you experience family and consumerism in the relationship to Israel. You spoke about Israel as, I don't know, the vacation, the Disneyland, the place for a peak moment for your community to feel family with each other. What about an experience of family towards Israel? And how is that creatable? Do the peak moments do that? Or is that something that the 6,000 to 10,000 miles away just makes it irrelevant?
I think that's a real challenge. I think that you're correct that most Israel missions, Israel becomes the product or the tool for strengthening American Jewish identity in local communities back in America. And it's not about creating genuine family relationships between American Jews and Israelis or a deep, nuanced understanding of Israeli society. But I do believe that it is possible to create a more nuanced and rich relationship with Israel.
A family one?
I do believe that. I believe it can happen through education.
Through education.
Because in addition to peak experiences that can be immersive and short-term, ongoing rich education, which sometimes it can
so in
create
many
that
ways,
family
what you're
model.
doing is exactly, you're doing a Sarah move when it comes to Israel. You're saying, I can't create peak experiences which create a family with Israel, but I have to do sustained long-term engagement with Israel. Does that then create family?
I think it creates a sense of obligation, commitment, mutual understanding if there's a genuine process of engagement. with ideas, with texts, and with people and relationships. And I think the challenge in a consumerist environment is whether people will make that commitment, the time that it takes to do the learning and the dialogue. Because you asked if it's possible to create relationships with Israel. I think one of the obstacles for many American Jews today is that they are engaging with Israel in sound bites, in alerts at the bottom of a TV screen, in the way in which social media approaches any topic in short form. And Israel is so complex and so nuanced, and there's no way to unpack the layers and layers of complexity and ethical dilemmas and different ways in which American Jews can understand their Jewish identity in this era of sovereignty without taking time to study, to grapple with dilemmas.
It's like family is only strong when you actually spend the time to know each other. Israelis speak about the family model, that they feel that you are family. Do you feel that Israelis feel that you're, do you feel they're verbing a family to you?
No.
You don't
Not-
feel?
I can't get there because for me, family means intimacy. And so I really think that I want to tell you a story, a short story.
I love stories.
Okay.
Because we're a family.
When we have meditation at Beloved every Sunday night we've had it for about a year. And often 10 people come, 12 people come. It's a small group, it's a beautiful, we're weaving relationships, all of what I just said about family. Then we had a Sunday night in November, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, where we had 30 people at meditation. And I asked, what brought you here? And they said, I'm so stressed out because I just spent the weekend with my family. So I love your vision of a loyal, heart-opened family. I know it's not as simple as that, but I also think the word family is overlaid with a lot of obligation that doesn't feel good. And in a culture where you get to choose what you're obligated to, why would you choose something that doesn't feel good if it's not actually your immediate family who you are forced together with on Thanksgiving? I'm not saying this for all people. I'm just saying this was an experience we had at Beloved. So I just am excited to think more about the in-between. There's something about choosing to be obligated and finding meaning out of that choice that feels like it's both family and consumerism and not extreme in either way.
It's
So
interesting. Yes, Lauren.
I also have a story I want to share, and it's also related to that question of family. I think that what is so attractive for people about being part of a family is feeling accepted, feeling seen, feeling known. And we recently had an encounter between a group of North American rabbis and a group of Israeli rabbis for a week, an intensive encounter, maybe the first time Israeli rabbis and American rabbis had that amount of time to dialogue and to study together. And there was a very powerful moment when an American rabbi said to the group, I'm so pained that I've spent my entire adult life learning Hebrew, studying Zionist thought, studying Jewish text, feeling that it was my responsibility to get to know Israel and Israelis, and I don't feel it reciprocated. It feels like a one-way street. Have you ever read the hundreds of years of Jewish thought that have come out of the conservative movement and American Jewish thinkers? Have you read our stories? And it was one of those moments, those aha moments, and the Israelis felt, wow, we haven't read your hundreds of years of Jewish scholarship and Jewish thought. We don't fully know you.
For Israelis, I could speak for myself, the most significant part of family is loyalty. Is that I will be there for you whenever you need me. I don't have to like you. I don't have to know you. You just have to know that I have your back. And this is so embedded in the Zionist story. This is what we are a community. Maybe it's the embattledness, but and again it goes back to the tragic model, or what you either tragedy or challenge, that for Israelis, they actually feel they're phenomenal family members. We're there for you. But you're looking for family
We're
as
not
a
looking
verb.
for instrumental relationships. We're looking for
For-
genuine relationships of trust and vulnerability. And I think it's
And
a human
hearing
yearning, and we
and
don't
seeing.
feel
And you don't
that
feel
we're
that.
seen and known.
Family, consumer, stories, challenge, is it a tragedy? Sometimes it's also a comedy of errors. But it's a dance. I want to thank you, Sarah and Lauren, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were on, you're not muted.
So I think both of our North American rabbis echoed some of the same feelings that we had expressed in our conversation. Gosh, wouldn't it be nice if Israeli Jews cared about us? Wouldn't it be nice if they were interested in how we live, interested in what matters to us, interested in our way of life? Wouldn't it be nice if we felt equally invested in by that community as we feel that we invest in them? And I guess, sort of tragic or depressing aspect of this is it didn't seem like our North American rabbis have that much hope that that's possible. Clearly, Daniel Hartman has some hope of that. But Rabbi Sarah Luria was basically just like, yeah, I don't think you can create intimacy between Israelis and Americans. And Rabbi Lauren Birkin, she said, well, I think you could create intimacy between Israelis and Americans. They're just not interested in it. And then Daniel Hartman said, what's so beautiful and tragic about this conversation is Israelis think that they're being really good family members to you because they have a different definition of what family is hoping for. You're hoping for a mutual conversation. I want to get to know you and you want to get to know me. And Israelis are like, I don't need to know you. I have your back. It doesn't matter what you do or how you think or what your actions are, or we've got the back of world Jewry. If they come for you, we will get them. Right? That's the Israeli idea, if something terrible happened and the United States of America turned on American Jewry, Israel would be there.
I wonder how that would be. What would
But
that be?
what about American Jews being for Israel if something happens in Israel? How much support will they get from us?
Well, yeah, which is also, I think, part of, right? If you define family that way, do you have my back? Then it's no surprise that the Israeli Jews expect American Jews to perform these acts of performative loyalty all the time. Yeah.
Well, what we did.
Vote for Trump, not Biden, because Trump has Israel's best interests at heart, right? That's what we heard from Israeli Jews.
That's
right.
what.
Yeah, I mean that's now, but I remember in '67, my neighbor across the hall from us in Queens, her mother was a major officer in one of the large women's Orthodox women's organizations, and she took a huge amount of money into Israel by way of Switzerland to buy weapons. I remember those instances where huge amounts of money were raised every time Israel was in danger. And it still would happen, despite who's president of the United States. If Israel is threatened, I'm sure that we would be raising huge amounts of money. We're doing it now as best we can for the Ukraine, and trying to help Jews in Ukraine. So we certainly in that way will help Israel. Many Jews went to fight for American Jews went to fight for Israel. What I was thinking about, even on a larger scale, we have about equal populations between the North American Jewry and Israel, but there's still a large number of Jews outside of those two areas. What is the relationship with those Jewish communities? Why aren't we all coming together in some way? Some of those other communities have been in danger, South America, and some of the in the Middle Eastern areas. Why aren't why isn't there some group that's pulling us together?
Yeah, I mean, I do think we do. I do think we do. It's just that we're talking about center of gravity, and it's 6.5 million here in North America and 6.5 million in Israel, or 7 million in Israel, and like 850,000 everywhere else in the world split up, or maybe 1.3 million, something like that. It's not a lot.
No.
Right.
Yeah, there just aren't a lot of Jews.
But that's all there is of us.
That's it.
Especially now when we're commemorating Yom HaShoah, where we lost 6 million that would have potentially been, who knows what, 25 million by now.
Yeah, no question. No question. Marcia.
I thought of something else too. They think we have it pretty easy because except for the Orthodox, their kids serve in the army. And they probably think we have nothing to worry about. We don't have to worry about, we don't have to suffer worrying about kids in the army. And our life is pretty easy. And I think that's another reason they don't really think or worry about us too much.
Yep, I definitely think there's something to that. Yep, when my cousins turned 18, they served.
Yeah.
And when I turned 18, I went to college.
Yeah.
That's different.
And I have heard that from my cousins as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for the terrific, engaging conversation. And next week we will we'll join again. Next week is Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day. I hope that we do that everybody comes on Sunday nights to our really wonderful Yom Ha'atzmaut concert, where we hired an Israeli singing duo named Yonina. That's the name of their band. Come and do a concert with us on Zoom, and I hope you all come at 7:30 on Sunday night. That's how we're celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut this year. I'm going to close us out by playing one song from Yonina, so that you can all a sense for them as like a preview for the concert. And then next week we will look at shared believers, partners, and investors. The other three models for how to think about, for how to think. You know, at the very beginning of this lecture, Hartman said there are 5 different models, 5 different new ways of thinking about Jewish peoplehood: family, shared believers, partners, investors, and consumers. And today we looked at family and consumers, 1 and 5. And next week we're going to look at the other
2,
3:
3, and
shared
4.
believers, partners, and investors. So I think that will also be really powerful and interesting. So I look forward to joining with you next Thursday. And here is, sorry, here is Yonina.
העולם מתארגן לכיבוי אורות, אוסף אליו עוד יום מתוק. הרחוב מתרוקן ממכוניות, ואנחנו בשקט מניחים את הראש. לילה, לילה טוב, חיבוק של ירח, כוכב מנשק את מצחך, אחזיק אותך קרוב. אם תרצי אשאר לצידך, בחלום השמיים קוראים לישון, מסמנים איך זמן חלף. עוד סיפור מתגלגל לו על הלשון, גם השמש תנוח לפני שתזרח. לילה, לילה טוב, חיבוק של ירח, כוכב מנשק את מצחך, אחזיק אותך קרוב. אם תרצי אשאר לצידך. לילה, לילה טוב, חיבוק של ירח, כוכב מנשק את מצחך, אחזיק אותך קרוב. אם תרצי אשאר לצידך.
המלאך הגואל אותי, המלאך הגואל אותי מכל רע.
לילה, לילה טוב, חיבוק של ירח, כוכב מנשק את מצחך.
Sweet.
Lila Tov. Yeah, they're
Lila Tov.
Lila Tov.